Okay, so answer content. What should be within your answer? What are the characteristics of a top level answer? Well, there are four main characteristics, and we're going to talk about these in detail, but I just want to introduce them to you first. So the first is it is well developed, right? Well developed. And we'll come back to these, remember, but we're just going through them at a high level view here. The next is it references either the pre-seen or the unseen. Now, the unseen is the scenario itself. It answers the question. We talked about this in the first part of this webinar. And the last one there, it's accurate and correct. So let's have kind of a run through each of these. So well developed, what does that mean? It means that it's well explained and you've taken into consideration the wider context. So you haven't just given, a 2-sentence response, very basic arguments. You've expanded upon your arguments. If you've given a recommendation, you've stated why. If you have given some input, you've stated why. So that's what being well developed is all about. Now, referencing the pre-seen or the unseen. So remember, the pre-seen comes out a few weeks before the exam, and you're required to read it and go through it and watch videos on it. And really, that's an important document because you can use that information within the pre-seen inside your answer, and it should make your answer stand out. That's what the markers like to see. That's what the examiner likes to see, is the use of that information inside an answer. And that goes for the unseen information, the information from the scenario as well. The unseen information is a lot easier to integrate into your answer because your question will be normally based on a scenario. So you can use that scenario inside your answer, whereas the pre-seen is just a very large document that is based on lots of different things. Okay, so the next one then is answers the question. So this comes back to the first point that we made in this webinar. Your answer should directly answer the question that has been asked. And the last one there, it's accurate and correct. That cannot be underplayed. Okay, so top level answers, they know the syllabus inside out, but really it's very important for the technical subjects. And in particular, we're talking about F2 here, where if you are asked questions about financial standards, things that can either be right or wrong, it's very important that you're technically correct and that you are accurate, because that's going to get you the top marks in those types of questions. Okay, you will get some marks even if you're possibly wrong by a little bit, but you want to get those top marks. And that can be achieved by just becoming a bit of an expert at the technical aspects of F2 and as well actually P2. That's really, really important. A lot of people shy away from those areas of the syllabus, and it's a bad idea because if they come up, you won't do well in those questions. Okay, so in terms of tips, so sometimes we have a question with the MCS paper and people say to us, well, I run out of content to write about in my answer. And I understand sometimes in the exam, it can be difficult to kind of freeze up. And, to prevent a situation where that happens, some students that I've had in the past like to ask themselves, after every major point, why is this significant? So give that a go. Try and think about why it is the point that you've raised. Why is that significant for this business? Or maybe it's an aspect of the business, certain kind of aspect of the business. Why is that significant? So, for example, if you're answering a question on debt and equity and you've said, well, this business has lots of property, plant, and equipment. But why is that significant? Well, having lots of property, plant, and equipment means we can use that as collateral. Why is that significant? Well, that decreases the risk for the lender and therefore the interest rate will be lower. And why is that significant? Well, it'll increase our profits, hopefully, cheaper debt. So you can see just by asking yourself that question, you can kind of prompt yourself and get more content inside your answer. Now, the word because is another one as well, where if you put the word because at the end of some sentences, it can help draw out and develop your points further. So that's another technique that some of my students in the past have mentioned to me. Okay, so the next point here is one for the people who possibly have multiple answers that they'd like to give. Now, this is a position of luxury, but I have had people in the past say to me, well, I have lots of answers that I think I could give to this particular question, but which ones do I pick? If I have multiple answers, which ones would I choose? Well, the answers that are the most easy to incorporate into the scenario, that would be my tip. So the ones that are the most easy to kind of weave into that scenario that you've been given, that's the best types of answers to choose from. The next is make as much of an effort as possible to apply your answer to the scenario. So at the OCS, it's very difficult to apply your answers specifically to a lot of the technical questions because they're asking you about materials that they've given you, and you have to give a bit of an explanation. And it's hard to kind of build that pre-seen information into the OCS. The MCS, a little bit more is expected of you. You're expected to apply your answer to the scenario, not give generic points. Try to make sure that your answer is specific to the company that's being tested. And in order to do that, I think it's really important that you have a good and thorough understanding of the pre-seen document. Some people in my network have suggested reading through the pre-seen document every single day until the exam. Now, I think that's excessive myself. I don't think that's necessary, but I do think it's important that you read it yourself and maybe read it once a week. I still think that's going to kind of get you the same gains as reading through it every day. But if you want to read through it every day, then that's that's something that you can definitely do. Okay, now before you sit your paper, it's really important that you have some idea of the ratios of the business, because ratios are quite straightforward in terms of integrating them into your answer, especially around the kind of sources of finance types of questions that come up every now and again. I think they're quite easy to bring this ratio information into. So really good to know those ratios before you sit the exam. Make sure your technical knowledge is sharp. And we talked about this a bit, but a lot of people shy away from the tough aspects of the management level. And the really tough aspects are things like, financial derivatives and accounting for financial assets. And I completely understand these are hard parts of the management level. However, don't shy away from them, okay? Because if they come up in your paper, then you'll be an expert. You'll be definitely able to get through them. And often, the questions that we put off, the content that we put off, the stuff that we don't look at tends to come up. That's always been the way for me. Maybe I'm unlucky. But when I try to ignore certain parts of the syllabus, it would just come up in the paper. So try to cover yourself as much as possible. Leave nothing to chance. Now, another good one is just to go through CIMA's solutions. You can get those on the cgma.org website. And what I'm saying here is have a look through CIMA's own solutions and see how they put together a solution, how they would answer their own questions. How do they kind of structure it? What's the content inside those answers? Often you'll find they're quite straightforward, they're quite basic, and that's good enough. The point is very easily understood in those solutions. So maybe that's a kind of a hint as to what you should be doing inside the paper.